Celestyna Galicki. I'm the research lead with the Commission of Financial Capability. And with me is Paul Nicolini, also from the Commission, and he is supporting me in this webinar, and he will also be feeding your questions to me. So before we launch into the data, let's do some housekeeping first. So if you have questions at any time during the presentation, just type them into the chat box, please. And every few slides, we will stop for questions and Paul will read those questions back to me. And also please mute yourself. I see everyone is muted. We all know the Zoom drill very well by this time. Okay, so today we will look at some of the main findings, and I will also provide some new data that's not in the report in response to questions that some of you sent in. The Financial Capability Barometer was a survey of more than 15,000 adult New Zealanders, and we had quotas for gender, age group, ethnicity and region of New Zealand to make those proportions representative of adult New Zealanders. So it's the largest financial capability study in New Zealand, and it's the first attempt to develop an understanding of New Zealanders' financial capability as opposed to literacy. Literacy is just what people know, a level of financial knowledge, which is important, but we know that it doesn't translate in a straightforward way to people's financial behavior. And financial capability looks at people's actual behaviors and attitudes. So I know that there is most interest perhaps in debt and financial well-being topics. That's what I gather from the questions that I have received. But we are the Retirement Commission, so excuse me, we'll start with retirement topics. For me, one of the most striking findings of this report is how many people don't know the KiwiSaver settings, not knowing what fund type they're in. So we are talking about growth or aggressive or balanced, and also quite a lot of KiwiSaver members don't even know what the contribution rate is. And this is a concern for us when we think about retirement savings, because if you don't know what fund you're in, it's likely that you are not a fund that's appropriate for your situation, whether it's a long-term view or looking to buy a house with this money in a few years' time. And not knowing one's KiwiSaver fund type, it was especially high among young Maori and young Pacifica respondents. And this just contributes to this inequality that already exists in the net worth. And for me, this is low-hanging fruit because it doesn't require people to save more money than they're already saving. It doesn't require any radical change in behavior. It just requires them to engage with their KiwiSaver and make a choice that fits with their goals. We have done some qualitative research in the last year for the review of retirement income policies. And a possible reason for Maori disengagement with KiwiSaver is that some of them don't believe they will live till 65. And it is a sad fact that we do have this health inequity and difference in life expectancy. However, you can pass your KiwiSaver down to your children or whoever is the beneficiary of your will. So there is still this aspect of building long-term wealth of the entire funnel. And there was also a gender gap in this KiwiSaver engagement. 33% of women, 1 in 3 women, KiwiSaver members, didn't know the KiwiSaver fund type compared to 1 in 5 men. And I don't really know how to explain that because it shouldn't be happening, not at this time in history when we have equal access to education and we have women succeeding in so many areas. Those barriers that to engagement with KiwiSaver for women, that's something that really needs to be researched in more detail in the future. Now, expected main source of retirement income varies by age. And in a nutshell, the older a person is, the more they're likely to expect to depend on New Zealand superannuation as the main source of income, whereas younger respondents are more likely to say they will rely on KiwiSaver. And we don't know if this enthusiasm for KiwiSaver is because they expect the KiwiSaver income to be higher than NZ Super, or because they think that there will be no New Zealand Super at the time they retire, a sentiment that was shared by some of the participants of focus groups, again, last year for the review. And that's one of the topics that we will dive deeper in as we discuss some additional material. And we also see how not knowing what the source of retirement income will be, it declines with age. Oops, sorry. And another retirement finding is that New Zealanders are not thinking about retirement really, and we have surprisingly high numbers in all age groups of people who say that they have thought about the amount of money they would need for retirement hardly at all or a little. And this changes with age, but even after 50 years of age, we still have about half of people who didn't really think about it. And again, we've got those high level of disengagement, and at the same time we see, and if you have read the report, there was a whole section discussing confidence that one will have a financially comfortable retirement. This confidence is higher among younger people, and one of the reasons why they're more confident might be because they haven't really thought about it, and they haven't really run their numbers yet. So some of the explanations here may lie in those expectations about what the source of retirement income will be, because New Zealand Super doesn't require any specific planning, nor does KiwiSaver. It's automatic enrollment and some choices to make, but it's not something that requires thinking a great deal. So maybe we should phrase this question differently next time. Okay, let's pause here for a moment for questions.
Thank you so much, Celestyna. That was really informative. So I've got 3 questions for you. First one is, have you thought of surveying for habits, beliefs, and cultural perceptions, as well as results?
Mm-hmm. Yes, so we do have some questions about beliefs and about subjective financial well-being, and I will discuss some of them later. Now, cultural beliefs, they're an entirely different topic that we didn't delve into yet, because we know they have an impact on people's financial behavior, but at the same time, we have such diversity, and when you do an omnibus survey that captures the whole population, any question you put into that survey, it needs to be relevant to at least a substantial proportion of people you are addressing with that survey. So this is part of our plan for the future, because if you have read the report, you know that we are planning to design a new survey that will serve the data needs of the financial capability community better, because this was the first attempt, and it didn't go as much into those softer aspects of financial capability as it could have.
Thank you, Celestyna. Now we have another question from an attendee who is wondering how many people aren't thinking of retirement because they're not planning to retire. Quite a lot of older people say they're not planning to retire.
Yeah, yeah, that's me, Shirley. We've heard quite a lot of people have sort of said to us, look, retirement isn't a concept they identify with. Some people are planning to transition out of paid work at some point, but they don't think of that as retiring. Some people are planning to work forever, but they just might change how they work or whatever. For either because they can't see that they will be able to stop working financially, or because they think it's actually good for them to keep working. So I wonder how many people in that category are here that they actually aren't thinking about retirement because they've already decided that's not a thing for them, unless they have to medically retire or something.
Yes, thanks. That's a great question. We actually asked people at what age do you plan to retire? And we were surprised how many people said 70, not 65. But yes, there is, especially among the boomer population, this feeling that no, they're not old, they won't be retiring. But when we spoke to actual retirees in focus groups last year, almost all of them planned to retire much later than they actually did. People overestimate how long they will stay healthy. People overestimate how long they will be able to work without being disrupted by, I don't know, caring responsibilities in the family, or ageism as well came through. So yes, people, some people are not planning to retire. The question is how realistic is that expectation? Is this something that we should say, okay, you're not retiring, so we are not really worried that you're not thinking?
But I mean, that does apply to any age, though. People in their 50s medically retire as well. And I guess we do know that a third of people over 50 who are unemployed have been unemployed for more than a year. That's as of last year. It'll be different now because a whole lot of people have just been, that have lost their jobs. But so yeah, you've got a lot of people that end up not being able to get another job if they lose their job. But also people medically retiring. So we're talking 50s there rather than often rather than necessarily 70s or whatever. But most people I know, and I'm in a few years ahead of the traditional retirement age, but behind, younger than. But most of my friends are saying 67, 68 is when they aim to retire.
Yes, and that's what we have seen when we asked this question, what age do you plan to retire? So we need to move on to the next question so that we can go through all the content that we have.
Yeah, we just have one more question, Celestyna, for this part. Any gender gap in thinking about retirement?
Yes, and it is in the report. So the report is 50 pages long, and I didn't transfer all the content from the report to the slides because that would have been unmanageable. But yes, there is a gender gap, and perhaps it's something that's outsourced in families to the men. At least in some families, but we don't really have much data to support this hypothesis. So like I said, it's the gender gap in retirement savings, in retirement, in thinking about retirement, in retirement planning is something that we really need to research some more in the future because there are so many gaps in our knowledge here. Okay, thanks. Thank you for the questions, and thanks everyone for the questions. Let's move on to emergency savings. This is a hot topic right now because of COVID, and of course this data is pre-COVID. It's 2018, 2019, and we had several waves of the survey, but all those indicators were very stable. People's financial behaviors and attitudes don't really change that much unless something like COVID happens, because now we see changes in those behaviors and attitudes. And there was a separate report that's published on our website about that. So a bit less than 1 in 3 adult New Zealanders say they have 3 months emergency fund, which is the amount that is recommended by most personal finance experts. And again, it really differs by age group. And I must say that every single financial behavior attitude that we looked at in the survey differs by age group. And age is often the determining factor, more so than income, more so than education, more so than any other factor. And it seems that only after 65, more than half of people have this proper emergency fund. And we don't know if this reflects the accumulation of savings over time and the time when you paid off, when people pay off their mortgages and other debt, or just lower expenses and lower needs in retirement. So 3 times your monthly expenses or 3 times your monthly income is a much smaller sum, much smaller amount in retirement than for many people of working age. And also have seen in the report that Maori and Pacific peoples are more likely to have very limited emergency savings. But I would be cautious with interpreting this as necessarily always a disadvantage, because they had a very high proportion of unsure responses. And perhaps that question didn't resonate with them because that's not how they plan for emergencies. Maybe it is more common in these groups, as suggested by some people to me, that they rely on help from extended family and community. So some of them might be actually quite well protected in terms of resources without having the cash in the bank. That's also something that we need to explore more, because we have this view that it's about the amount of money that's sitting in the bank, and that's important. But people's social networks and people's extended support networks, they make a huge difference in how they are able to deal with an actual emergency situation. Now, consumer debt, and I admit that we didn't go in depth into that topic when designing the survey, because we were mostly interested in retirement. So we just asked, who do you or have you owed money to at any time in the last year? So it's the type of lender. We don't know how many loans of each type people have. We don't know the amount of these loans, and also some types of loans like bank overdraft were not really included here. But there are still some interesting data points here. So the first, almost 1 in 3 people are not paying off the full balance of their credit cards. And that's including people who don't have credit cards at all. So credit card debt is very common and normalized. And we are talking about interest-bearing credit card debt, because if someone uses their credit card as a financial tool by paying it off each month, that's not in here. And the second interesting point for me was how many people have loans to a finance company. And I looked at who they are, and it looks like many of them would have no problems getting a loan from a bank, but still they choose to take a loan from a finance company, which usually means higher interest. All those debt patterns, that's the second topic that we'll do a deeper dive at the end of this presentation. We also looked at debt, consumer debt by housing status. So renters, owners without a mortgage, and owners with a mortgage. And it's surprising how much in debt on the whole mortgage holders are. So it's not just the mortgage, it's very often it's quite a lot of consumer debt on top of that. And we tend to see renters as those who would be borrowing more. It's not always the case. when it comes to credit cards, it's those who have a mortgage who are actually more likely to have a credit card that they are not paying off in full each month. And apart from the low level of emergency savings, this is another aspect of the low financial resilience of New Zealand households, which now in the crisis that we are in is just showing up, whereas it was hidden before. So many people who have a good financial situation, if you just look at the surface of it, they're homeowners and they have good incomes, they are actually quite exposed financially because of their debt commitments, which means that if their income stops or is reduced, it can be not a long time before they fall into financial difficulty. We also asked people how worried they were about their debt, and that's a question that we ask only of those who have any type of debt at the moment of the survey. And again, 1 in 3 are very worried or quite worried. And we have a gender difference that's perhaps not unexpected, because we know that women tend to be more susceptible to stress and anxiety than men, but the difference is quite striking, and it's not like women in this data set are much poorer than men, no. So women are much more likely to feel stressed because of concerns about money, and also more likely to be embarrassed about their finances and hide or conceal their financial situation from family or friends. 1 in 4 women admitted to hiding or concealing their financial situation. And I think this just shows how much of this emotional burden of money management within families falls on women, because very often in the household it's the woman who has to figure out how to make the money stretch and how to feed everyone, and also trying to not stress out other family members. So they are carrying this burden alone and hiding their worries about it, which is not healthy from a mental health perspective. And so we are just entering the mental health week, and I think another research that we need more of is the link between debt and financial stress and mental health, because anecdotally we know everyone is telling us that people are stressed when they're in debt, that this worsens their mental health, and that their mental health improves when they come out of debt. But we don't really have any New Zealand-based hard data that I know of that would provide evidence to policymakers that investment in financial capability is an investment in mental health. Okay, let's pause here for questions. Do we have any questions for?
Yes, so we got 4 questions for this part. The first one refers to the emergency savings slide. And one attendee wonders, would it be good to put an option of no savings?
Mm-hmm. So there is less than 1 month that captures no savings, because 0 is less than 1 month.
Okay. And then on the same slide as well, the emergency savings slide, another person wonders, are people on benefits included in the survey?
Yes, yes, they are. And it didn't, we didn't look at this group specifically, but as you could expect, they are most likely to be in this lowest category, less than 1 month's worth of income. And of course, when you're on a benefit, work and income doesn't encourage savings, because any savings you have means that you are less likely to get a hardship grant when you apply for it. And so that's an entirely different conversation.
Cool, thank you, Celestyna. Regarding the mortgage holder and consumer debt slide, we had a question. Are you sure people aren't getting confused with a personal loan and a mortgage? They may not know the difference.
So I don't know. I think for most people, getting a mortgage is a big big decision, and with all the conversation, public conversation about housing affordability and buying a house that we have in the media, I think people do understand what a mortgage is, and from the number of people who picked both mortgage and personal loan, for example, I think people do understand the difference. Maybe there is a small percentage of people who don't, but I think that would be those who don't have a mortgage in the first place. Because the process of going through getting a mortgage, I can't imagine how you could go through this process and not understand what a mortgage is and how it differs from a different type of loan.
Thank you. Another question about the worrying about debt slide. Do we know what type of things people went into debt for, leaving mortgage out of it?
No, so that's one of the limitations of this data on debt. And like I said, it's because people who designed the survey, and it wasn't me, I came to the commission after it was already in place. They didn't focus on debt because the main purpose of the survey was to research people's attitudes to retirement savings, retirement planning, and also short-term savings. So there was much more focus on that savings part rather than on the debt part of the equation. No, we don't know. But in the report, if you look at the profile of who has credit card debt, these are not people on low incomes. People are on mid to high incomes are actually more likely to have this credit card debts, which they are paying interest on. So I would say that a substantial proportion of this debt is for consumer products. It's not for basic necessities. It's not survival debt.
Great. Thanks, Celestyna. Those were all the questions.
Okay.
Can I just ask a question about mental health and being in debt? I think if we look at it as a mental health problem, that's the end result of a system failure further upstream. I just wonder if you have any comments about the age of people who are in debt and are now being stressed. How much financial training have they actually had in their life? And I would probably posture to say that they've had very little. And so my question is, do you think there should be a lot more financial competency made available to the population at large, but mainly in terms of workers?
Yes, so young people are more stressed. That's very clear when you look at the split by age. Is this linked to the lack of knowledge, or is this linked to their financial situation where they are not yet established and haven't built up their assets? We don't know, and that's something that is really worth looking into. And yes, financial education, improving financial competency, it does lower stress. We do ask participants in our sorted courses how the stress level due to finances has changed, and they report, yes, I'm less stressed out about money now, and that's without any change in their income. It's just acquiring some financial knowledge. But we don't even know how much financial education these people were exposed to, and it's hard to measure because there are so many sources, and most people get a lot of their financial knowledge from friends and family, for example. And how do you measure the quality of that knowledge? So that's one of the questions that we will be addressing, hopefully, with the next survey.
Yes, some research I read recently was something like about 75% of workers wanted some financial education.
Yes, there is definitely demand, and Paul from CFFC, who is here with us, he is in the financial capability team that does workplace financial education, and he could tell you a lot about the demand for financial education from employers, and there has been an increase in that demand, but we are still far from 100% coverage, which is something we would really like to have.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so now let's move on to the really complex stuff. Financial well-being, subjective financial well-being. We attempted to capture subjective financial well-being by asking people, how would you describe your current financial situation? And we had those 6 metaphors as possible responses, and these were developed by people who did the 30 in-depth qualitative interviews with households based on what language people were using to speak about their financial situation. And this question has been fairly controversial because some people pointed out that how people answer this question may depend on how good they are at swimming, or the place of swimming in their culture. But it is what it is, and it's been used as a basis for the financial well-being segmentation. And it's important to remember that these categories are based exclusively on how people are feeling about themselves. There isn't any objective data like income or savings levels that come into that. And there is a chapter in the report that shows how those segments vary by income, by housing status, by other factors. And that's also something that we will be diving deeper into soon, because the goal of financial capability is financial well-being. But what is financial well-being? How much of it is this subjective component of people just feeling that they are okay financially, and how much of it is this objective measurable part? And is there a measure that can be applied to anyone? Is there a level of financial well-being measured by income, by savings level, by KiwiSaver balance, at which we can say, yes, you are okay, you have achieved, you have arrived at financial well-being? Okay, so now we'll return to some of those topics, and these are the slides that I made in response to some questions I have received. So first, the first deep dive: young people who expect KiwiSaver to be their main source of retirement income. A couple of people just noticed that what, how, because, and someone noticed that the size of KiwiSaver balance required to provide more than New Zealand Super is around $500,000. And I haven't checked this calculation. It looks about right. So the question is, are those young people overly optimistic about what they will get out of KiwiSaver, or are they really on track to get more out of KiwiSaver than New Zealand Super? And who are these people who are counting on KiwiSaver to be their main source of retirement income? And how are they using the KiwiSaver? So these are all very interesting questions. And here is some data. So these people are more likely to be female, living in Auckland, in paid employment with a university degree, so young professionals earning money. They are more likely to have non-mortgage debt, less likely to own a house. And they are more likely, and when I say more or less, it's compared to sample average, they are more likely to be in a growth or aggressive KiwiSaver fund, which means that they have engaged with a KiwiSaver and made a choice, because default funds are not growth or aggressive. But at the same time, they are also more likely to contribute at the minimum rate of 3%. And the KiwiSaver balances, most of them have a KiwiSaver balance under $20,000. So what is the verdict? Are they realistic, saying that KiwiSaver will be the main source of retirement income? And for most of them, no, it's not a realistic expectation. When we assume retirement at 65 and average female lifespan, and of course those assumptions here could be questions, especially if many of them plan to work longer. But if you contribute 3% to a growth fund, then a person would need to start at the age of 18, earning 70K per annum, and keep this up until 65 without any breaks in employment, which for most people is not realistic. Of course, they may expect KiwiSaver to be the main source of retirement income because they don't believe New Zealand Super will be there. That would explain this expectation. Or they might expect that the income will increase in the future and that they will turbocharge their contributions at a later stage in life, which makes sense because they are educated professionals starting their careers. But overall, this is a good case study that's showing that what people believe or expect, what they tell us they expect, it needs to be questioned because we do find a lot of unfounded optimism in personal finance. That's not the only part of the survey where this happens. So that was a really interesting question. Who are these people, and are they realistic in that expectation that they are reporting? Okay, second deep dive, consumer debt. So like I said, we have very limited data on consumer debt, but we still can do some more work with the data we have. We can add the number of types of debt a person has. And the thinking behind it is that if you are borrowing money and you need more, you first go to the sources you already have, you're familiar with, and only after those have been exhausted, you move on to the next source. And I know this is not 100% like that always, but that's the best assumption we can make to use this data we have. So people on average have 1.4 types of loan, and Maori have the highest average number of loan types per person. People with dependent children also have a quite high number of types of loans, and renters borrow from more sources than homeowners, which is worse than it looks because many of homeowners will have a mortgage, which counts as one loan. So the difference actually should be increased by 1. So non-renters 1.3 loans on average, renters 1.5. This is a statistically significant difference, but for non-renters, if you would remove mortgages from that, it would be much lower. People who expect their financial situation to improve in the next 2 to 3 years have a higher average number of loans, loan types, than those who do not expect their financial situation to improve. And that's one of those many instances I mentioned where people being too optimistic, or just people being optimistic, actually leads to more risky financial behavior, because we know that some of this optimism about the future, well, that was 2018, 2019, and now we have COVID. So many of those expectations didn't work out. Those aged 65 plus and those who have a 3-month emergency fund, they have the lowest average number of loan types. So I hope this sheds some light, additional light on our debt data. Now, the third deep dive, I think that's the most interesting one, because as you have seen in the report, those subjective self-assessments of how well are you feeling financially, they are not linked to income or other indicators in a linear fashion. So who are the people who have a very strong mismatch between their income and how they perceive their financial situation? So who's got low income but high subjective financial well-being? So these are people who are either young, like early 20s, or old, as in post-retirement, predominantly female, a lot of retired people in there, some professionals, homemakers, students, overrepresentation of couples, and not burdened with debt. So we see that it's part of it is about life stage. When you're young, when you're a student, your income is low, but you have hope for the future, and you have a good life in many other aspects. Also, people who are retired, who have a good social circle, who don't have debt, and who derive satisfaction from other things in life than money, they're likely to be in that group. Now, who's got high income and miserable subjective financial well-being? That's much more interesting. And the profile here is middle-aged, employed European male managers. There's an awful lot of managers in that subset. Living in Auckland is overrepresented, having debt, and agreeing or strongly agreeing with the statement that I'd be happier if I could afford to buy more things. And these are people on high incomes, but still they don't feel happy with how much they can afford to buy currently. And we have this, we had in 2018, we had quarterly add-on modules to the survey. They were a sample of 2,500 each. And one of them included those materialistic attitudes questions. And I must say that percentage of people who agree with those statements, it was surprisingly high compared to how New Zealand likes to perceive itself as this egalitarian, do-it-yourself culture. So we see very clearly that subjective financial well-being is affected by other factors that have sometimes nothing to do at all with money. It's level of aspiration, levels of materialism. Who do you compare yourself to? So migrants from countries with a lower living standard, they tend to have higher financial well-being because they compare themselves to people in their home country rather than to people around them in the new country, at least during the first years after arrival. The quality of relationships, and that came through very strongly in the focus groups that we did last year. So people in retirement, they said, those who didn't have a support network said that the expenses they didn't expect, all those fees for handyman and for all sorts of help that they see other people are receiving for free from their family or social circle. Personality traits, and also physical and mental health. And dissatisfaction in one area of life tends to spill over sometimes. So, like I said, this is the complex part of it. And subjective financial well-being is important, but if we want to help people achieve it, what is it that we are supposed to be doing? Because there's huge overlap with topics that have little to do with personal finance. And I know that many of you who are working in financial advice or in budgeting services, you know that money is a holistic topic. It can't really be detached from the rest of the person. But when our goal is to improve the financial capability of New Zealanders, where how far do we go and where do we stop? Where does financial capability end? Where do other things begin? So that's a question that we will need to investigate in the next survey. Yeah, this is a picture that tries to illustrate this complexity of financial capability. So what we know is part of it, but knowledge isn't enough. And it works in a similar way, like weight loss. Knowledge is not enough. How we think, so attitudes and habits, then there are emotions, then who we are, so culture and community influences, policies that influence our choices, like KiwiSaver, auto-enrollment, and how we connect, how we communicate. So all that affects financial behavior, and some parts of it, like those social and cultural norms, life events or emotions, that are harder to measure and harder to influence than just knowledge. So the question that I would like you all to ponder and to leave you with is, what do we need to know to more effectively improve the financial capability of New Zealanders? Because it's very interesting to look at all those behaviors and attitudes, but the question is, okay, so what information does it give us that helps us do our jobs better as financial capability practitioners, as policymakers who want to improve financial capability of all New Zealanders? So I think the Financial Capability Barometer, it was a very useful start to exploring this topic. It was a pioneer in that space, but it's limited in the practical conclusions that it is able to give us. And that's why we are redesigning the survey to make sure that the financial capability sector in New Zealand gets all the information, or as much of the information they need. And we would very much like to hear from you what data you need and what you think is important. And now I will open the floor to questions from those last slides, and also if you want to share any ideas or any insights on that topic of what do we need, you're welcome to do so, or you can email me later. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Celestyna. That was really wonderful and eye-opening stuff. Thank you. We have a few questions for the last part. The first one refers to slide 11, I think. It's on the KiwiSaver charts. One person asked, should the red on that chart have been KiwiSaver blue? Now, I'm not 100% sure what that exactly means, but feel free to elaborate. I think it was Mark?
Yes, so we have seen this slide before where it was all blue, but these groups, red highlights those groups who are aged 18 to 40 and rely on KiwiSaver. So all the statistics that we are discussing at the following slide, they're from those groups that are highlighted in red. And I agree, it should have been captioned more explicitly.
Thank you, Celestyna. The next question is, could it be that young people are still factoring in super as a secondary source and not a primary source?
Yes, but this question asks about the main source of retirement income, and the question specified that main means the one that gives you the highest income. So if they expect New Zealand super to be around when they retire, then this would mean that they expect KiwiSaver to be higher, the income from KiwiSaver to be higher than the income from New Zealand super. And that's where this whole question some people asked came from. Okay, how are they going to do it?
Great, thank you. Next question, have you asked questions about how well people are mitigating the risks of losing their income before they reach the age of 65?
No, we haven't asked that question, and I think it's the savings question that is the closest that we have about this, to anything about this topic, because the recommendation of 3 months emergency savings is it's supposed to be insurance against losing your income, with the assumption that it will in 3 months time you will at least sort out some new arrangements that will allow you to live on the limited income. We didn't ask about insurance in that survey because it was not among the top topics as related to retirement savings.
Thanks, Celestyna. Next question, was there any relationship between having children and feeling like they don't have enough money?
That's an interesting question. So I haven't looked at that, and I can, but not right now because this would require going to a data set. But if you look at the report in a number of regressions there, and I did use having dependent children at home as one of the factors. And when controlling for everything else, it doesn't make a huge difference for most things that we did look at. So when controlling for income, when controlling for home ownership status, when controlling for education. Now, among people on lowest incomes, that's when having dependent children is clearly increasing their burden, but this is a small proportion of population. If you look at the population as a whole, you don't see much difference, again, controlling for all the usual suspects between people who have dependent children and who don't. But in terms of financial well-being, because I gather that you are asking about this kind of subjective kind of financial situation, we actually didn't look at that. And it's an interesting question, and I might extract some supplementary tables to answer that question and publish them as an appendix to the report. So thanks for the question.
Yeah, that was a great question indeed. Next question is, do you have previous barometer results? If so, can you compare over time?
Yes, so the survey started in 2017. Now, 2017 data is different. We asked different questions, and it was a much smaller and less ambitious survey, so it's not directly comparable. Some of the items are. Now, here, we have a number of subsequent waves in the survey, and like I mentioned at the start, those financial attitudes and behaviors, we haven't seen much change over time. They seem very, very stable. And we are continuing the survey now. The 2020 edition is happening as we speak. And only after the COVID crisis, we are actually noticing some changes in financial behaviors. So you need a strong external shock for this change to be noticeable. We have seen KiwiSaver membership creeping up slowly, which is good, but we haven't really seen any dramatic changes during those 2 years.
Great. So this is the last question now, but if you have any other questions, feel free to pop it in the comment box. I wonder whether it would be possible to ask about insurance in the future. Accumulation is part of the challenge, but the risk of being unable to accumulate wealth is important to consider.
Yes, so, and I did have a long conversation with Professor Elaine Kempson, who is the financial well-being expert in Great Britain about it, and because she doesn't ask about insurance in her surveys. And the problem is, if we want to measure people's financial skills, insurance is very individual, and I think we did ask in one of the waves, and 100% of people who are homeowners had home insurance, and that was a no-brainer. But other data, it doesn't really show you whether the person was susceptible to a salesperson, as we have seen in some complaints that we had, I think, last year about people in South Auckland buying multiple policies they didn't need, or is this person really acting in their own best interest in a financially capable way? Because you need to know a lot of additional information about the person to assess whether their insurance decision was a sound decision, and it would be hard to get all this information out of the survey. So these were our considerations, and that module, when we did ask about insurance, it was really hard to entangle, okay, so what does it mean for people's financial capability? it's very different from someone having an emergency fund or not, where we know what the good thing is and what the bad thing is. It's very simple, and I think it's there's space here for the insurance industry to do this research. I don't think this is something that is within the scope of Commission's work as much as savings and also debt, which is the other phase of savings. Okay, I think I will now open the floor just to free-form comments and also any ideas on how to move forward. We have a few minutes left.
Yeah, maybe feel free to just unmute your mic if you.
Yeah, you can talk now.
Yeah.
Celestyna, it's Lane here from North Shore Budget Service.
Hi, Lane.
I'm increasingly, of course, in these COVID times seeing, KiwiSaver, we see, people have to come to a budget service really when they're doing a KiwiSaver withdrawal. Do you think maybe in your next survey, you'll include a question to KiwiSaver providers about the increase and also the reasons why people are withdrawing their KiwiSaver, because we see KiwiSaver increasingly used as a bailing out tool, and when you start to try and guide people away from using their KiwiSaver for debt, to be honest, the sort of people we see are often so desperate that it's not even, you can try and have that conversation about preserving your KiwiSaver for your retirement, but so maybe that's something to bring into your next survey to KiwiSaver providers?
Yes, in the 2020 edition, it has that question.
Ah, good. Cool.
Yeah. Now, what I'm really interested to hear from all of you is what sort of data would make your financial capability work easier, because this is what we are trying to achieve as we redesign the survey.
Sorry, Celestyna, I just had a little question coming in. How about putting the 2020 edition out so we can provide feedback?
Okay, so the 2020 edition, it's already in the field, which means we won't be making any changes to it until it runs its course. But it's 2021 that we are talking about, because we want to change the way we are approaching this topic, and this gives us enough time for consultation. And of course, the results from 2020 will be published as well once we finish data collection.
Celestyna, sorry, another question. Do you think there's value in, the obvious thing is to get them when they're young. And so I know there are some people who are going into schools and doing financial capability training, but might be valuable to find out exactly how much is going on in New Zealand of that and what the quality is, and how many young people are actually getting trained. Because I think that's always the biggest thing, is that if you get them young and you get both sexes in school, they're a captive audience, and that's the way to really tackle the whole thing.
Yes, and Sorted in Schools is one of the initiatives of the Commission.
Yeah.
But it's not mandatory. It's voluntary uptake by schools, and as you know, teachers have a lot of content to go through.
Yeah.
So it's always competing for space in the curriculum with other things. But the uptake of Sorted in Schools has been increasing. Of course, you also have other programs in schools, some of them run by private entities. And yes, I agree that we need to map out this space and know better what is happening there.
Yeah, thanks.
Celestyna, I have another question. For next year's report, will you get the feedback before the report goes out, or is it going to be after it's out, after the report's out, and then getting feedback?
I'm happy to get feedback before the report goes out, because this way we can answer all the questions in the report itself. And if you're I think if you subscribe to this webinar, you are on our mailing list. Is that right, Paul? So you will be informed of any future developments in that space. And I know that the way we have been doing it was we've been just doing this survey and not talking much about it apart from single data points in the media. But now we do have the capacity to actually engage with the ThinkUp community deeper on this data. So we will be communicating much more than we used to. And this also includes getting your feedback before things are published or before survey questions are designed. Okay, if we don't have any more questions, thank you everyone for coming and for the great discussion and really interesting questions. If there is anything else on your mind, you can always email me. My email is on the slide there, or you can email CFFC's office and they will redirect it to me. Thank you.